So some viewers and I got to talking about Jordan Peterson and the rise of Jordan Peterson and why is it that we need an intellectual like this to speak everyday truths and common sense to us. And you know I like where the conversation is headed. It's a lot to type, but I think we're all sort of cut from the same cloth on this. Why do we need people like Jordan Peterson? And why is it that we have such online chaos? And how has social media become bad for our mental health? Um, you know, as you can see from my background, I'm a software and technology guy, so just that's the background I come from, and so that's kind of how I lens things. I really believe technology has a much larger share of the blame than I think people automatically would assign to it. And this is why. Think about before social media, right? So back in the days of George W. Bush, MySpace was rising up, etc. Think of the times you've moved in your life. There's such a concept as culture shock, right? When you move from one city to another city far away, it's a culture shock. What is culture shock? Well, we are psychological products of our environment. When you change the environment, you're the psychological product of an environment that you are no longer a part of, and as a result, you are now maladapted for functioning in that new environment. Okay? Anybody who's moved, and I've moved well over a dozen times, close to 2 dozen. So I have plenty of experience in culture shock and having to hit the ground running and adapt quickly based on my new environment. But anybody who's moved knows what that's like. It's very disorienting. Now, there's another way to create culture shock, and that is to rip the environment out from under you and replace it with a different one. So instead of you moving, the environment shifts. And what social media has done is effectively done that. It's ripped the rug out from under everybody. We're all used to being products of our own local environments. Now there is this global environment. It's almost as if, to put this in comparison to like the establishment of a new country, like the establishment of the United States, and I'm going to use that because I live here and it's the one I'm just most familiar with, product of my environment, right? What happened with the United States? We were a colony. We fought for our independence because there was, a discrepancy between us and England. And then, we won our independence. Now what? Now we got to be a country. And what happened? The Articles of Confederation was the first attempt, and that didn't work out so well. And then we had the Constitution, followed by immediately 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and we have since amended the Constitution ever since, right? But it was this brand new country. We established it. We said, okay, we have this new environment. We have this new country. Now we need to sort of figure out what the rules of engagement are. How are we going to do this? Well, the first attempt didn't work out so well. Second attempt, much better, still not so great. Bill of Rights, even better. And then a short series of amendments that followed, right? Well, it's kind of sort of the same thing with technology. We have this global environment now. I mean, you can go see what people in Iran are tweeting. We have things like Google Translate. So whereas previously you couldn't see what people were saying in other countries if it was a foreign language, now it's translated for you. Well, every different post you read from every different person is like a little micro culture shock. And we're the product of our environment. The problem is our environment is a different environment for every post we read. So every post we read comes from a different environment. Guys, it sounds like the Dawson and Clark sketch, The Front Fell Off. We towed it to a new environment. Anyways, if you haven't seen the Front Fell Off, look it up. Um, but technology, however benevolent it may have started off, just because you have good intentions doesn't guarantee good results. And I think that is a big part of the collective mental health crisis, because nobody really knows how to be, right? Because we've it's like this new country has been stood up, this new environment has been stood up, and we're all coming from all these other cultures and all these different environments, and it's this clash to sort of figure out, okay, what is this new online environment supposed to be? What are we supposed to do with this? How are we supposed to move forward? And everybody gets frustrated and fed up because what works for us in our personal lives doesn't seem to work online. And it's like, well, okay, then you get this concept of the online mob, and that's the online mob comes around as an attempt to sort of coerce and enforce the acceptable standards in which we're gonna, exist in this new virtual environment. So we've only been doing this about 10 years. We've been doing social media about 15 to 20, but really, it wasn't until around 2012, 2010. The first iPhones and Androids came out between 2008 and 2010. But then they really just took off and exploded, between 2012 to 2014. So we haven't been doing this very long. Everywhere you turn and roll around is a culture shock. It is, it breeds tribalism, because we are fighting and competing for the survival of our ideas. So it's now kind of sort of intellectual Darwinism online, right? So the best ideas have to fight for survival and the bad ideas die. And this can be a good thing. It hasn't been all bad. I mean, the rights for gay marriage largely leveraged, social media to get that done, and that's a good thing, right? Some things go over the edge. We're not really ready for certain ideas, and so when we come into high frequency contact with some of those ideas, it gets uncomfortable. So, why is Jordan Peterson, what was responsible for his meteoric rise to, we'll call it fame, notoriety, right? I think it just has to do with the fact that in his particular position as a clinical psychologist and a professor, he's intimately familiar with what's known as inalienable truths. Things that resonate well, that can cross multiple cultural boundaries, and finally provide some psychological relief to people from multiple cultural backgrounds, and to kind of sort of help, establish order where the mob is failing. You see what I mean? So we have the online cancel culture, right? That's part of what drives cancel culture. Is we're trying to hammer out what our online existence should be. It's like establishing a country, in a way, hyper democracy, if you will. So it's social media in and of itself is just a very large social experiment, and it's not always. It's not always a good thing. One of the things we talk about is cultural appropriation, stealing from other cultures to make it your own. Well, that's kind of sort of, that's literally what has to happen online. As the cultural boundaries are unilaterally demolished online, we have to decide what the online culture is. We can't do that by creating brand new culture from scratch. No, it has to be a competition, okay? And in the competitions, there's winners and losers, and to the victors go the spoils. So now we're having, you know, online cultural appropriation, and that too is a problem. So we don't necessarily need people like Jordan Peterson, but it's certainly very refreshing to hear someone like him. And the thing that makes him so novel, I think, is the fact that he is, well, I mean, he is an authority figure. So he can't, you know, none of his arguments are fallacious. He is the authority, right? When somebody says, what gives you the authority to say something like that? He says, I'm a clinical psychologist and a psychology professor. Like, these are facts. Go to the textbook, go all the way up to the PhD. So you can't argue against his authority. So that goes a long way. But the other thing, and you see this in his Kathy Newman interview, he says, I'm very, very, very careful about the words that I choose. And he is. And he goes back and he corrects people. The Kathy Newman interview is notorious for deliberate misinterpretation. I did a video on it, I think. I'll have to dig it up. You know, where everything he says, she'll say, so, but what you're really saying is blank. He's like, no, it's not what I said at all. And at one point he says, no, see, because you're projecting into what I'm saying. You know, and he says, I'm very, very, very careful with the words that I choose. And so because of that, his messaging has been consistent, whereas the average person, their viewpoints, their arguments would fall apart, or you could poke holes in it. His are very, very bulletproof. And they come from, they come rooted from what we know to be self-evident truths, universal truths, and he uses a universal language. And you know, he's very calm. It's hard to get him, you know, knocked off edge, and that comes from, you know, from his clinical background. You know, you can't stir up a shrink too much, right? Of course, there are videos where he loses his temper, but all of that to say, you know, I just see it as technology is kind of sort of the invisible antagonist to all of the mental health issues that we're facing. And I think that it's contributing to the mental health problem in that particular way, where it's causing mass dissonance between the cultures and the realities that we know in our personal lives versus what's online. And so it's what works in the real world doesn't seem to work in the virtual world, and what works in the virtual world doesn't work in the real world. But the virtual world is always changing, and it impacts our real world. So is enough to drive somebody crazy, which is why I don't get on social media hardly at all anymore. I mostly keep everything uninstalled, except whenever we have fun family weekends, I make a video and then I install Facebook and I post the pictures and the videos, and then I leave. So anyways, it's my thoughts. Please like, comment, or share. I'll see you guys on the next video.